Well, let's switch gears a little bit and start to talk about your early career influences because I know there is a Waffle window story that I want to sort of pull out of the archives and tell the listeners about because it's all a part of your journey that started not in multifamily but kind of ended up getting you there. So let's talk about Waffle window, kind of those early jobs, and then there's this moment when Disney came to town. So I'll just kind of leave that out there as a teaser, but kind of talk us through that experience.
Wow, you get deeper than any other podcast host that I've ever spoken to. You're getting my life story. So when I first moved to Portland, clearly I had no job. And so I had this philosophy that I actually was in a competition. I moved here with a boy. We broke up shortly after. It was just like we both wanted to move here, so it was great. Um, we were like, who can get a job fastest? And he has special skill. He was like a bike mechanic, and there's a million bike shops in Portland. So he's like, oh, I'm totally gonna get a job first.
Mm,
I was like, you know what? I'm gonna take a stack of resumes. And I'm gonna walk up and down Hawthorne, which is like a really cool, trendy street with a bunch of businesses on in Portland. And I walked up and down the street and I walked into restaurants and I acted like a Karen. And I was like, can I speak to your manager? As if I was some disgruntled customer. And then when they give me the manager, because obviously they're going to, then I would totally change my entire personality and be like, hey, I'm Sydney. I'm looking for a job.
mm.
And it worked at one of the restaurants. They're like, the owner is here. And she came out and she's like, hey, I don't have time to interview you. Just walk me to my car. I'm going to Costco. So I walked her to her car and she asked me about my experience. I'd had a million hat and apron jobs all throughout high school already. So I she gave me the job. She called me like 2 hours later and gave me the job.
Wow.
So
That's the
great.
hustle right there.
I worked there for a while. Then ultimately I ended up I was still doing theater and dancing, and I went to a call for Disney, and they were doing a dance call at a local dance studio in Portland called Fred Astaire, which is actually a chain. So you may have heard of it. There's like Fred Astaire and Arthur Murray, and they were just using the studio. They renting out the space, and I was a pretty good dancer. Like I stayed to the very end, but then they're not considering you for a Disney princess if they only take a picture of the front of your face and not your profile.
Mm.
I don't really have the Disney princess profile. I don't think this nose is quite right. But anyway, it did not work out. But the owner of the studio came up to me after the show or after the audition, and she's like, hey, are you interested in becoming a ballroom dance instructor? And I wasn't, but I said yes because I wanted to take free ballroom dance classes because I was broke as hell. And so I ended up just like thinking I was going to take a few free dance lessons from them, and ended up being there for 3 years, competing professionally all around the country in ballroom. And it was awesome.
So what is the I'm trying to wrap my head around like the ballroom dancing life. So you go in, you're teaching lessons, but you're also doing your own performances. You're traveling around. That
When
sounds exhausting at some point, right? Physically, mentally, I'm sure that got tired. What for you? You said you were there about 3 years. What for you was the moment where you're like, you know what, this I've had enough. I'm going to transition out of this.
Yeah, it sounds like such a glamorous job. And people would be like, oh my God, you're a professional ballroom dancer. And I wear these like Swarovski crystal dresses all the time. It was very glamorous for 5% of the job. But 95% of that job is selling dance lessons to people and then walking them around in circles while they step on you or argue with
Mm,
each other. So it felt like partially it was a teaching job, partially it was a sales job, and partially it was like a marriage counselor job. It was very strange.
right.
But you know what? It taught me some really important skills that I will never take for granted. As a 20-year-old who literally could not afford to take dance lessons from my own self, I was so afraid to talk about money. I'd be selling these dance. It was $130 for a 40-minute dance lesson with me, which was an insane amount of money. I think that's still insane. But I was selling these packages of dance lessons for like 5 grand to these people. And I was so afraid. And I was like, oh, it was just there. I had a lot of barriers. And I was told by one of the other instructors or the owner at the company, they're like, don't assume anything financially about anyone. Don't assume that that is a lot of money for these people. Like those two are lawyers. This is their
Mm,
hobby that brings them closer together in their marriage. You know what you're worth, and you're creating value, and a dollar is different to every single person. And that was really valuable moving into multifamily. And like some of these luxury buildings, a lot of us would never be able to afford to live in. And it can be really scary to sell something that you can't personally afford. But when you stop judging, making judgments on people, like assuming what is a lot to someone, it puts you in a much better position from a sales perspective.
Mm.